All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Recipe Ingredients for All Lands Projects webinar. This webinar is part of the Pacific Northwest Forest Collaboratives Workshop webinar series. We have the RVCC team and a few panelists here for the webinar. I'll introduce them in just a second, but before we dive in, let's just go over the ground rules. Please make sure you're muted this entire time unless otherwise asked. Keep your video disabled as well. If I see anyone unmuted and talking or on video when they're not supposed to, I will unmute you and turn off your video. It just helps this go a little smoother. Please use the chat box to ask questions. Your chat will be restricted to the host, which is me, and I'll make sure everyone on here who needs the questions gets the questions. And if you have any questions that don't get asked on the webinar, please reach out afterwards. We're happy to answer any questions you have and help you with anything you're working through. This webinar is brought to you by 6 different sponsors, 7, I can't count, there's 7, or even 8 at this point. Hampton Lumber, Oregon Department of Forestry, the Forest Service, Beneficial State Bank, Timberline, Greenwood Resources, and the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Emery Cohen of RVCC, and she's gonna kick us off.
Great. And thanks everyone for joining. My name is Emery. I am a program coordinator at RVCC, and I'm going to be co-facilitating this with EJ Davis of the System Workforce Program and Becca Shively, Program Manager with RVCC. And for those who may not be familiar with RVCC's work, we're the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition, and a lot of our work focuses on kind of promoting solutions that support sustainable land management and healthy rural communities in the West. And just because I want to make sure that who needs to follow along with our work, I'm going to just paste our newsletter sign up in the chat. Sally, I'm allowed to do that. Do it anyway, though.
Yeah, looks like you did.
Cool. So if you want to follow along with our work and haven't signed up for the newsletter, you can go to that link. But yeah, we do policy work, we do peer learning events like this, and we do kind of sharing of those in our network. And so before we kind of plan the webinar, I wanted to start out with a little bit of an interactive activity to get people thinking about all lands. And what we have found, kind of doing some of the background research for this webinar, is just that it means a lot of different things on the ground. So as people are kind of continuing to join, maybe could everyone put in the chat, oh shoot, Sally, would this work? Can people put in the chat box what all lands mean to them?
Sure, let me change the, all right, go ahead.
Cool. I would love to see if folks could just put in the chat box a few themes or concepts that they think of when I say it's work. And if you can think of something other than cross-boundary, that's a pretty common synonym. So anything else that you think of when I say all lands work, just take a minute or two to throw it in the chat box. Just love to see what people think of in relation to that sort of work. Hopefully it should be good to do that. Cool. Partnerships, coordination, all working lands, landscape scale. Anyone else? I know we have a lot more people on the webinar. Ecological and community outcomes, shared ownership, pooled resources. watershed scale, multiple benefits. Cool, awesome. Definitely save all of that. Guys, so I'm going to turn it to EJ actually to do a little bit of an introduction on All Land's work and RVCC's backpatch. She's done a lot of that sort of work. And yeah, thanks for saving that, Sally. And she's done a lot of work with All Land's stuff. So EJ, I will turn it over to you, and I'm going to share my screen with that. So give me just 1 sec to find it.
Great, thank you, Emery. So hi, everyone. I know some of you, I'm EJ Davis on the leadership team of RVCC, and I also work with the Ecosystem Workforce Program, which is an applied research and technical assistance entity between the University of Oregon and Oregon State University. RVCC, as part of these goals that we have, part of this is fostering learning, particularly about doing all lands work across landscapes. And all of the definitions or words that you've all put up really resonate with how we define that. So in our work, we define all lands as cross-boundary management that involves multiple stakeholders and landowners within a shared landscape who are coming together to plan and or implement land management activities that have a common goal. We define it as including at least 2 ownership types and multiple partners who might own or manage lands or otherwise contribute resources. Go ahead and change the slide, Emery. Thank you. So RVCC and its partners have a long-standing role in supporting this work through a variety of types of resources. So we have some guidebooks and studies here that kind of help translate and interpret how you might use different policies and programs to support all lands work. These are really for practitioners. We've done a series of case studies that's growing that helps kind of dig into specific cases of an all lands project and really show the ingredients of how those worked. And then we also organize peer exchanges and assistance to convene folks. And in a digital or a virtual format, this is intended to be one of the latter. And so today we're going to be talking about one of our latest all lands projects or products, which is something we're calling an all lands checklist. It's kind of a list of considerations for those who are seeking to do all lands work. And Emery and I, particularly Emery, have been creating this product over the past few months based on what we've learned across the years from RVCC's work and what's out there from practitioners such as yourselves. It's important to know that this checklist that we're creating is not a strict recipe and that you must march through it. We see it as kind of a menu of ideas to help people think about how to do all lands work more strategically and productively. And we thought that by bringing in some peers to help discuss this document as well as their own experiences, that this would create a great opportunity for peer learning as well. So Emery, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Great. And so Sally sent out this document yesterday via email. So if you didn't see it, you can definitely kind of go back and take a look through. But this is kind of an outline document of what we've been working on. We have a version that is still in draft form. And so the hope, again, was to kind of touch on all of the elements that practitioners may want to consider when kind of undertaking an all lands project. And basically hoping that not only can this webinar be a peer learning opportunity, but we're going to take all of the kind of experiences that you all share and go back, revise our document, and then kind of get it into a nice final designed form. And then we'll send it out hopefully by the end of this year to all participants on the webinar and kind of our network more broadly. So look for that in the next few months, and you can definitely know that we took your feedback and the experiences that you shared here and worked that into this document. And so in terms of an agenda for today, I'm gonna turn it over very quickly to our 3 awesome speakers. We have Andrew Spaeth with Washington Department of Natural Resources, Alyssa Cudmore with Wallowa Resources, and Amy Markus with the Fremont-Wainema National Forest. And those 3 are going to share basically their experience with all lands work and focus on a few of the elements that are outlined in the document in the All Lands checklist, and talk a little bit about how those kind of played out on the ground in their different locations and projects. And so after each speaker, we are gonna have just a couple minutes for questions. And then after that, I'll let kind of Sally maybe make the call on whether we might stay as a big group or we might break up into a couple breakout groups to talk a little bit more peer-to-peer about experiences with All Lands work, and just have a chance to talk with our speakers in a little bit of a smaller group atmosphere. So do that for, I think, something like 25 minutes. We'll all regroup. If we are in breakout room, have kind of some final concluding thoughts, final Q&A, and then wrap it up. So, let me see if I have our notes. We kind of say for these breakout rooms or discussion portion that we hope that everyone can this discussion. This is really meant to be a peer learning opportunity, and we know that All Lands work can be pretty challenging. So feel free to share both kind of successes and triumphs, but also what sort of challenges you're facing, because that's equally important, I think, for peer learning as well as informing our All Lands checklist. So with that, I think that's it, and I will turn it over to Andrew. Andrew, I have your slides up, and I'm going to.
Great, thanks, Emery. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Spaeth. I work as an environmental planner at the Washington Department of Natural Resources, and I work in the Forest Health and Resiliency Division. So those of you who aren't familiar with the department, this is a relatively new division. We used to be housed within wildfire, but now our own standalone division, and we're comprised of 4 sections. So we have federal lands and the Good Neighbor Authority work. We have a small prescribed fire program, community and landowner assistance, and then the team that I sit in is called Planning, Science, and Monitoring. And so that's kind of the perspective that I have and sit within in the agency. What I want to do today within the context of this conversation and the All Lands work is talk a little bit about the role of strategic planning, some of the recent plans that we've developed at the department, and how they help align different partners and landowners in some of the priority landscapes that we're working. After that, I'll talk briefly about some of the mapping and landscape evaluation work that we do at the department that helps inform landscape prescriptions and identify treatment targets. And then I'll wrap up by talking a little bit about some of the monitoring work that we're doing to assess and track progress in implementing our forest health related goals in the state. So by way of a little bit of background and context, there's often an event, it seems like, that kind of tips off or sets in motion some legislative action. And in Washington's case, the 2015 wildfire season, is kind of a landmark. We had over 1 million acres burn in the state. The state spent nearly $250 million on wildfire suppression alone, and it was really a destructive wildfire season in terms of homes and other losses. Following that, there were a series of legislative requests. First, a budget proviso that requested the department develop a 20-year plan to deal with the forest health crisis in the state. And then the passage of Senate Bill 5546, which was passed unanimously and established what we call the Forest Health Assessment and Treatment Framework, which is really kind of embodied in our 20-year forest health strategic plan. So in 2016, early 2017, we set out to fulfill these legislative requests and really made a couple of intentional decisions at the onset of that process. We chose pretty intentionally to focus our efforts on forest health and wildfire risk reduction first in Eastern Washington, where it appeared that the science and the stakeholder and kind of partner interests and support were more clearly aligned, and there was opportunities to do work at more meaningful scales in a more coordinated fashion. And we also chose very intentionally to interpret the language the legislature had passed to be all lands in nature, instead of just focusing on the acres that are owned and managed by DNR lands, which are obviously critical for protection and for the management of the beneficiaries and supporting rural economic development objectives. We really understood, and the science suggested that we needed to address wildfire risk and forest health at scale in order to really make a difference and ensure we could protect values at risk and support the other outcomes that we all care about. There's as part of that, there was a mapping process that I'm going to talk more about in the next slide, but I think it bears mentioning here that as part of the 20-year forest health strategic plan, we identified 33 priority landscapes. And I really think it's in part that a science-based and stakeholder-driven mapping process that helped us foster really strong alignment across landowners and identify focus areas that have served as areas in which multiple partners have sought to leverage additional investments and resources to accelerate the planning and implementation work in those places. Since 2017, a number of things have happened at the department and in Washington state. And so there's some additional context here that I think is important to understand. The state developed a 10-year wildland fire protection strategic plan. So it's kind of an analogous wildfire strategy. More recently, we developed a DNR plan for climate resilience that includes a number of priority actions and goals related to wildfire risk reduction and forest health. And then we also signed a shared stewardship memorandum of understanding with the federal government, the USDA Forest Service, and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so given those changes and those other relevant strategic plans and kind of commitments that have been made, when the department was in the process of updating our forest action plan recently, which we update every 10 years, we really decided to use those as a way to kind of create an umbrella under which all of these different strategic plans fit, and we can clearly or more clearly articulate to stakeholders and internally what are our primary goals and how we're focusing our work. I think it also really is serving as a roadmap for the implementation of shared stewardship in the state. And that forest action plan kind of replicated the methodological approach we used to identify priority landscapes in Eastern Washington and identified a set of priority landscapes in Western Washington as well. So before we move on to the next slide, again, I just want to reiterate that I think these plans were developed in a really collaborative fashion where the department was genuinely interested in the input of stakeholders and partners. We obviously in our commissioner and leadership retained decision-making authority at the end of the day about what we were committing to and what these plans said. But I think that genuine interest in stakeholder input and the state's leadership role in really trying to strike a balance and advance meaningful solutions at meaningful scales is what led to what I perceive to be, at least, and others that are on the phone that are familiar with this can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think real alignment and really strong and broad support for the implementation of this work. So Emery, you can go to the next slide. So as I said, we conducted some mapping work associated with the development of our 20-year forest health strategic plan and the forest health assessment and treatment framework. This work was led by a team of scientists, namely Dr. Derek Churchill, who at the time was with the University of Washington. He's now a forest health scientist at DNR. Derek and the scientists that were involved in this process identified 12 data sets, including fire probability, insect and disease risk, departure, climate and drought related factors, habitat conditions, cold water streams, listed fish habitat, drinking water, timber volume in large trees, and then some wildlife related factors, and using those 12 data sets, summarize them at originally at the Huck 5 watershed scale, and then as you can see here, a smaller Huck 6 scale. We made it an intentional decision not to try to weight the factors and make anything more important or less important in the analysis itself, but just put the data on a map, overlay it in a GIS exercise to understand where we have relatively more of these kind of values at risk, and where we have relatively more of these kind of forest health related indicators, and collectively through that process begin to get a sense of what might be some high priority areas to focus our work. And so the results of that analysis are shown kind of in this background slide, the background map there with the green highlighted high priority areas. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to just kind of to describe or talk about as it relates to this is, we have this science-based mapping process that was then used to inform a series of, really it was a roadshow, it was a series of presentations and conversations with Forest Service partners, conservation districts, the local forest collaborative groups, various interested partners that have ownerships in these landscapes and that have ongoing management responsibilities and goals. We brought this information to them, we shared it with them, and then collectively started to draw lines on the map and understand where we might be able to focus our work to really foster that alignment across multiple ownerships or multiple agencies and multiple programs in a particular watershed or set of watersheds. And so you'll notice that not all of the darkest red or highest priority areas are circled on the map, and some of the high priority areas include areas or include portions of the landscape that are the yellow or beige kind of color. And that's because we really wanted to support existing investments and ongoing work that was being advanced on the ground. Often NEPA takes multiple years, projects take multiple years to ramp up. Not all the funding becomes available at once. And so trying to really foster that sense of kind of shared ownership and buy-in for this was really critical. And I think continues to bear fruit in terms of the ability to leverage additional resources and investments to accelerate the planning and implementation of projects in these places. In each of these watersheds, the department conducts what's called a landscape evaluation. The landscape evaluation process is really what provides us with a sense of the current condition of the overall priority area. So we identify kind of general management zones related to long-term wood production, areas that are going to support active restoration, places that are going to need higher levels of wildfire protection, whether they're in the WUI or some other factors that are important to consider there. And then obviously other designations such as wilderness that may preclude active management. So we identify those management zones. We conduct a departure assessment to get a sense of how out of whack is a particular landscape. Do some fire modeling and risk assessment that also integrates some aquatic factors and drought kind of biophysical factors. And all of that is summarized in kind of a 6-page summary and a report that our scientists develop for each of these 33 priority landscapes. And then it's associated with what we call a landscape prescription. So for different forest types, we summarize the approximate number of acres that we need to treat either through mechanical thinning, prescribed fire, some combination of both, to move and shift the landscape from what's kind of an uncharacteristic wildfire regime or out of whack to a more resilient condition. And so those general targets are what we use to really kind of track and assess our progress over time in meeting the goals of the 20-year Forest Health Strategic Plan and now our Forest Action Plan, and create some benchmarks or some goals that all of our landowners, I think, can really rally around and try to understand how collectively we can meet those. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Emery. So the last slide that I have, and what I wanted to close by sharing is that I think in all of this work, we can really appreciate that just understanding and tracking our progress in implementing forest health treatments and activities across large landscapes is really important. I think the public really has an expectation that we're able to articulate what's being done and how public investments are being used to accelerate the implementation of this work. And then also, obviously, from kind of an adaptive management or scientific perspective, we want to understand over time how these treatments and whether or not we accomplish our landscape restoration goals, how those influence future fire behavior, how those influence the impacts and effects of future drought activities, and what those mean in terms of outcomes related to water, fish, economic development, maintaining our critical infrastructure related to these treatments. So there's that broad suite of things that we care about. And without the monitoring and treatment tracking, it's really hard to really pin down and say, are we hitting the mark? And how do we need to adapt or change our approaches over time to make sure that we're really effectively and efficiently using the resources that we have available to us and that our partners have available to them. So these are some of the early renditions of our forest health treatment tracking and monitoring framework. Our scientists, in partnership with our Forest Health Advisory Committee and some others, did put out a statewide monitoring protocol that kind of provides the framework for how we're conducting monitoring. That's complemented by an online platform that's currently being developed that'll be finished by June of 2021. That will include a series of maps like this. These are maps of a couple of our priority landscapes, and they show essentially different land ownerships, and the black areas are areas where treatments have been conducted, and then the kind of the hashed areas are the areas where treatments are being currently planned. And so you can get a sense of how challenging it might be to right, not only coordinate activities, right, and really truly do all lands restoration work in a strategic fashion, but then to get all of these different data sets and ways in which we track progress and monitor the implementation to speak to each other is a huge endeavor. And so we're in the midst of figuring out how to get all these different systems to talk to each other. But I think the outcomes, or the early outcomes of this process, are really promising. And again, I think highlight how critically important it is for us to be able to track progress and then monitor implementation over time. So the other quick thing that I want to mention here is that as part of this, we developed a survey 123 app. So this is a mobile app that you can download on a tablet or a smartphone. And it allows our partners and our staff to go out into the woods and collect data that can then be directly uploaded into this online system. And you can then have plots in the planning area, either pre-treatment or post-treatment, that help us understand at a more kind of stand level how effective we are at meeting our goals and the change that we're seeing on the landscape or in that particular stand over time. So I'll stop there. Emery, thanks for the opportunity to share some of our work.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. We are going to sit in a big group, I think, for the webinar. So we have a little bit more time for questions. Does anyone have questions for Andrew right now? And there'll be more time for questions later on as well if you still need to think about it. But feel free to pop anything in the chat for Sally, and we can take a few minutes to ask Andrew any questions right now. And then Alyssa, it sounds like looks like you're ready to go.
All right, so it looks like you can still chat to the group, but Alan asks, how is climate change factored into management plans?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that our team is thinking about climate change. So in the analysis that we conducted to identify the high priority landscapes, we include some data from Adapt West, which looks at essentially projected changes in moisture availability and the water balance deficit over time. And so what we're trying to understand is which parts of the landscape are going to be more susceptible to drought over time, and how we can focus our landscape prescriptions in a way that can address that. I mean, fire obviously is a big factor, and something that we're all, is kind of in your face and that we all hear a lot about and is of concern. But the real risk in a lot of places is actually drought. Drought is likely to cause more tree mortality and lead to more increased risk of insect and disease outbreaks than what we're likely to experience associated with wildfire in the future. And so that drought layer is really critical in helping us identify priorities. The other way in which we're considering climate change is in our landscape evaluation. And so there's an assessment that includes soils, topography, and current and projected climate. So really trying to get at that concept of kind of future range of variability, to understand how we can set treatment goals that are going to set the landscape up for what's likely to be a more a drier and hotter future. So
Thanks, Andrew. The next question is there a document you could share for the statewide monitoring plan?
That's a great question. I think that document is available on our website somewhere, but let me check and make sure. I know the science team was still making a few changes to the document based on feedback we'd received recently. So I'm not sure if that's online or not, but I'll follow up with you, Sally, and can share a link as soon as the document becomes available.
Sounds good. Thanks, Andrew. That's all the questions we have for the moment.
Cool. Alyssa?
Can you hear me okay, Emery? Okay, excellent. Thank you, Andrew and Emery. So my name is Alyssa Cudmore, and I work for Wallowa Resources, which is a community-based nonprofit out in Northeast Oregon. And I'm going to talk with you about how we are coordinating our all lands forest restoration work, but kind of more at the regional and partnership level here in Northeast Oregon, because we've not quite had the kind of state level coordination like they've had up in Washington state at this point. But first, to understand kind of how we are thinking about all lands work today in our region, we should kind of all go back to about 6 years ago. Prior to this time, there was not that much alignment across ownerships when it came to forest restoration work. Until the East Spaeth All Land project over in Baker and Union counties. And this was one of the first pilot cohesive strategy and joint chiefs projects in the country. It covered over 128,000 acres of federal, state, and family forest land. And it was really one of the first times we had concertedly treated across boundaries in a strategic way in Northeast Oregon. And it also resulted in the emergence of the Blue Mountain Cohesive Strategy Partnership and the partnership that I coordinate, the My Blue Mountains Woodland Partnership. And these two partnerships combined with Northern Blues Forest Collaborative really acted in this kind of trifecta, kind of working together to implement the East Spaeth All Lands project. My Blue Mountain Woodlands, which includes 9 different agencies and organizations like NRCS, Oregon Department of Forestry, OSU Extension, and many others, focused on outreach to private forest landowners. The Forest Collaborative focused on providing guidance to the Forest Service on public lands, and the cohesive strategy kind of had this overarching focus on all lands forest resilience. And in addition to treating over 10,000 acres of federal land and 6,000 acres of private land, I think more than anything, this project really demonstrated to us as partners in Northeastern Oregon that all lands work is possible. And we've been working over the past many years since eSpace to try and get more eSpaces off the ground. And realistically, it's been a little piecemeal, which kind of comes to one of our ingredients for an all lands project, really the underlying organization of our partnerships. And Emery, if you want to go to the next slide there, that'd be great. Thank you. Since eSpace, we've had a plethora of partnership capacity developed in our region, which is really exciting, but it hasn't happened necessarily in concert with each other. And this is very rough. I think it shows the many scales from kind of regional across Northeastern Oregon to local or county-based partnerships dedicated to project coordination and implementation, down to the landowner level that there are that are all like presently functioning in our region, all dedicated to forest restoration and fire resilience work, with many of the same partners going to the same meetings, and there is not a lot of direction between kind of the regional partnerships or real communications alignment kind of up and down to the middle managers who are dedicated to on-the-ground coordination. And as a result, we've been trying to figure out how to streamline this and make it more effective at all scales, because if you're constantly kind of creating these one-off groups that aren't connected to one another or talking to each other, you get overtaxed partners who would begin to get tired kind of with collaboration and grantors who don't want to fund the same work over and over, and partners who often are kind of replicating each other's work. And Emery, could you go to the next slide, please? This became more important and relevant over this last year when we worked together to help our two national forests, the Umatilla and the Wallowa wetland, coordinate the creation of a CFLRP, or Collaborative Landscape Restoration Proposal, that spanned both forests and also demonstrated match on the surrounding private and tribal forest land. As you see here in the above map from the proposal, it shows for one of the first times in Northeastern Oregon, kind of the strategic shared stewardship or all lands opportunity areas in red. And these are areas that are of collective importance to all of the partners involved in the proposal, and really present significant opportunities to implement meaningful cross-boundary projects across public, private, and tribal forest land, very similar to the Spaeth project. And we actually just heard as of last week that our CFLR will be receiving funding this year for implementation. And a big bit of feedback we received from the CFLR review committee, again, was that we needed to look at kind of streamlining our governance structure. And as a result, we've been researching and interviewing other all lands projects to kind of see how they've set themselves up for success. And we are slowly but surely learning, which has led us to move from that like a diagram that you saw in the slide before, to kind of fleshing out one that really attempts to streamline coordination and try to maximize implementation efficiency, using more of a scaled approach with a combination of teams at multiple scales, so that you both have the leadership buy-in and vision and funding across the full geography that you see here, kind of combined with the specialization needed within each of our cross-boundary projects. And most importantly, to ensure that the project has local level ownership and buy-in from those that are actually implementing the project. If you want to go to the next one. Thank you. And I'll just emphasize here that this is very rough. It's a draft. We have by no means figured this out, but we are simply trying to experiment with the elements of a structure that might work effectively for Northeast Oregon. And we thought it might be helpful to show others that might be experiencing similar challenges that we're dealing with. So we've outlined some of the ingredients we're thinking about for our general partnership structure. So first of all, we've got a kind of regional leadership team or steering committee comprised of the entities and individuals with the ability to provide leadership, overall guidance, and the authority to ensure operational and funding alignment across the region. And very, very importantly, are dedicated explicitly to all land shared stewardship work, which presently we don't have that in the region. This group will help really prioritize resources into those high priority areas and areas where there is, very importantly, existing NEPA to help and ensure alignment and timing across public, private, and tribal projects. And secondly, we've got these kind of local project specific coordination teams comprised more of middle managers like our unit foresters, district rangers, tribal foresters, county representatives, tasked with implementing and organizing the details, designing the actual projects, and then implementing it. And lastly, also some task-specific teams that work across our whole region, specifically dedicated to two areas we find are typically lacking at the local level, both communications and outreach and monitoring, like Andrew talked about earlier. So what we have here is kind of a cross-partner communications team that includes communications staff from our partners that specialize in communications like OSU Extension, Oregon Department of Forestry, NRCS, the Forest Service, and also a work group that is really dedicated to monitoring all lands projects, both of which can help add capacity at the local level and ensure that we're not recreating the wheel. And then if you want to go to the next one, Emery. And just the second piece kind of in the all lands checklist that really held true for us was getting the right people at the table. As a group of partners, we found it helpful to think about our work kind of as part of this all lands project cycle. It kind of captures the elements that projects like Spaeth have taught us are critical for successful cross-boundary projects. And most importantly, helps us identify, where those bottlenecks are at, and then the roles that each of us as partners can actually bring to the table to fill those gaps. For example, one aspect of all lands projects that we've learned is very important is a kind of a joint communications effort between multiple partners, and that oftentimes different messengers might be better at delivering different messages than we are. So for example, in one of our all lands projects this year, we have several prescribed fires that will be taking place on tribal and Forest Service land. And we are presently planning a webinar series to educate private landowners within that project area on the role of prescribed fire. Some of us, bringing our flexible funding to for outreach to private landowners. OSU and WSU Extension are presenting the webinar with kind of key talking points that they've co-developed by our partners at Oregon Department of Forestry, NRCS, the tribe, the city, the Forest Service. And I just think it's been a great example of really demonstrating that we can be more successful when we work together and kind of share the burden and take the responsibility for different roles, especially in times of resource scarcity. So that, I guess we're going to open it up to questions, I think, and then I'll pass it over to Amy to talk about the amazing work they've been doing in the Klamath-Lake area.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was awesome. Yeah, a few minutes for questions before we switch over to Amy. Does anyone have anything?
We'll give it a minute for people to type into the chat.
We could also move on to Amy too, Mark.
Everyone else does. Sally, can I ask my question or do you have any?
Nope, go ahead.
Alyssa, I'm curious, did you find that as you were doing that kind of creating of structures that there were any gaps that Wallowa or organizations had to fill, or you had to kind of figure out ways to just kind of roles that ended up not being filled, or gaps, I guess?
Well, I would emphasize that that kind of structure that I outlined, like it's very much in the draft stages. We are still working on what that looks like. So I'll just emphasize that that is not presently in place. But I think in terms of rules that are missing in there, that I think we've been playing as like Wallowa Resources, for example, is just this community-based partner, has really been in that the coordination role and being that partner to help kind of create alignment between the different partners. And that's been something that we've been helping with. And I think also the I think so many of those resources already exist out there. I think a lot of it is just trying to get the partners, kind of the right partners around the table. So right now you've got your kind of leadership that are doing right now like most of the coordination that's happening, and versus maybe around like, you know, looking at the screen now around like communications, like maybe it would be much better to have those individuals who have a specialization in communications to really be around the table talking to each other. And so I think that's where new roles don't really need to be created, more of just the right people being brought around the right tables, I think.
Looks like EJ had another question just about, has your partnership gone through any changes in key leaders? And if so, how did you navigate those?
We've gone through a lot of that over time. And I think the just structurally, I think something that you guys outline in all of your documents as well, but having an MOU in place that outlines key roles and responsibilities is very important. But I think more than anything, and I think Amy will probably talk to this too, is just this also just a really good firm understanding in the rest of the partners and leaders of what this work looks like, why it's so important to their work, and really identifying that kind of workload that really crosses a lot of different partners, and it really is meeting the needs of a lot of partners. So because then it just kind of becomes the program of work of the next individual coming into that spot, and making sure you're constantly kind of reassessing where that program of work really is needed at, because different organizations' priorities shift over time, and how are you kind of building that into your process and having conversations about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. Sally, is anything else?
Yeah.
In the chat box?
No, why don't we move on for the sake of time?
Sounds good. Okay, Amy. Thanks, Alyssa.
So next slide. Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So I'm Amy Markus. I'm the Cohesive Strategy Coordinator for the Fremont-Wainema National Forest. And so with that, I coordinate our Joint Chiefs and CFLR programs. I manage our Good Neighbor Authority agreements and projects. And I'm also the kind of the main Forest Service point of contact for our All Lands partnership, which is called the Klamath-Lake Forest Health Partnership. This partnership represents the Fremont-Wainema National Forest and then the private lands that are across Lake and Klamath counties in South Central Oregon. So this partnership has been around for a while. They actually started in the early 1990s, but most of the projects that they had done were at a small scale. And it wasn't until 2016 that the partnership was very intentional about wanting to do an all lands project that was at a landscape scale, meaning for us, that means at least 100,000 acres in size, if not bigger. And so we started with the North Warner project, and we were very purposeful in using that landscape as kind of a beta test for figuring out how the heck we do this, because it's not easy. And we were purposeful in starting with the North Warner project because, one, it was associated with a Forest Service NEPA ready project. And then it also did not have very many private landowners in it. There was only about 30 non-industrial private lands. They were larger properties. Most of them were long-term generational ranchers that had been working with the Watershed Council and some of our other partners already. So in a lot of respects, it was just kind of an easy project to wrap our head around. And with that project, we learned a lot. We developed a process. We really kind of figured out all of the agencies' roles and responsibilities and what our individual places in doing these all lands projects. And then we took that project and put it towards other landscapes. The next project was the Chiloquin project. That one was much more complex with subdivisions and 2,800 landowners. In a lot of ways, it was much more complex than North Warner, but what we found is that our basic process that we had developed worked well. And so at this point, we have about 6 projects that are all in varying stages of development, from planning through prescribed fire. The blue polygons are the projects we've identified as being our next all lands project areas. We're not quite ready to go to those next or yet, but we know that one of those 2 landscapes will be the next one that we focus on when we're ready. So next slide, please. So Andrew talked a little bit about state level priorities and the coordination happening at the state level. Alyssa did a really great job talking about the structure of all lands partnerships, roles and responsibilities. And so I'm going to touch on a couple of the ingredients that were identified in the RVCC paper, which are more the couple of nuts and bolts kind of ingredients that really have to do with putting all lands restoration into practice on the ground. So the first one is landowner engagement. And then the second one I'll talk about is funding. Okay, so landowner engagement, super important. And I think that it's important to realize that you need to use every single method out there to do outreach and education to make sure that you're reaching all the landowners within your landscape. So phone calls, one-on-one meetings, social media, brochures, webinars, workshops, you need to use it all. And then the other really important key is that outreach and education never ends. I think when I started these projects, I kind of thought, oh, we'll do this one workshop and we'll reach everybody and we'll get the education out there and then we'll be done. But what I've realized is that it's constant through the whole process. We've got one landscape right now where we just did a workshop where we helped land managers or landowners through the process of developing a land management plan. So they're more in the beginning stages of a project. And then we have another landscape where we've been doing mechanical treatments now for about 4 years. We're moving into prescribed fire. And so we have a workshop for landowners in a couple of weeks that's specific to prescribed fire. So you really need to be thinking about what outreach and education is needed based on where you're at in the process and planning of your project. The other thing that we've done, which has been super instrumental to our success here, is a private land mapping and inventory of the non-industrial private lands. And this has been a really great way to engage with landowners up front in the process, and a really great way to get them information for their own property. Most private landowners really have no data at all for their forested property. And so we've been able to get grant funding and hire a GIS consultant that delineates stands across all the private lands. And then we hire a summer crew. It's usually college students that visit every single stand and they do a really quick and dirty rapid assessment where they document, and this is all in collector drop-down menus. So it can be inserted into GIS really quick and easy. But cover type, overstory, understory, shrub, surface fuels, we map aspen stands, we map noxious weed sites. So we collect all this great data, and then we make these map packets, and then these map packets are available to private landowners to help them develop land management plans. And then it's also a great tool for your forester, who then works one-on-one with each individual landowner. And that's the other really important factor, is providing technical assistance, having a forester that can provide technical assistance to private landowners. Most landowners do not have a background in forestry. And so when you start talking about silvicultural prescriptions and logging operations and contractors, most landowners really have no idea where to begin with all that. And so you need to have a forester that provides technical assistance and walks them through the process from start to finish. We've been able to use, we're really lucky to have the cooperative agreement between NRCS and Oregon Department of Forestry that allows NRCS to fund ODF foresters to provide the technical assistance that's used to expend the EQIP NRCS funds on the ground. And so between the NRCS EQIP funding, as well as all the other grant sources that we've been able to bring in, we've actually added capacity. We're not using the Oregon Department of Forestry stewardship forester. They've actually been able to use grant funding to hire a forester specifically for our all lands projects. And this forester is the one that kind of keeps track of everything happening with all the different grant sources across the private land. And by having one kind of central person that keeps track of all that, they can see opportunities to implement across private lands or between private lands and federal lands. That brings opportunities to maybe use the same contractor. We have a really cool story in the Chiloquin project of they had 6 or 7 landowners right next to each other that were all, I think, less than 200 acres. But by implementing at the same time across all those properties, they were able to do a logging operation and make that economically feasible. Working on one individual property at 200 acres would have never been economically feasible, but by combining those together, they were able to actually do a commercial harvest. And it was that lead forester with ODF, along with the Watershed Council, that recognized that as an opportunity. Okay, so next slide, please. So then the next ingredient is funding. With the mapping and inventory that we do on the private lands, we're able to combine that with data on the Forest Service lands to develop a strategic plan and to set priorities across the entire landscape. This looks really good when you're writing grants because it shows that you're organized, you're working together, you've done the strategic planning and priority setting. You've already engaged with all the landowners within your landscape. And so when the funding does come in, it's really efficient and streamlined, putting the money to the ground, and we can just jump right into implementation. So I think that strategic planning and priority setting has really helped us in getting some of the grant funding that we've brought in. I would just say apply for every single grant possible. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but if you don't try, you're not going to get any. And so it's just important that as a partnership, you're constantly writing grants, reviewing grants, working together. There's times I'm writing grants that are submitted by Oregon Department of Forestry, but it doesn't really matter. The point being, we're all helping each other out. And that's really our ultimate goal, is to get money, because that means getting acres treated on the ground. And then lastly, you need a diversity of funding and lots of it. These treatments are very expensive. It takes a lot of funding to do it and do it right at a landscape scale. And then it's also just really important to have a diversity of funding so that you're accommodating all the different landowners that are within your landscape, from, you know, small 10th acre subdivision lots where they're doing defensible space treatments to 1,000 acre ranch lands that are trying to do restoration across larger properties. Some funding works really well for those larger properties and others don't. Another example is just some of our funding sources require that we do NEPA and cultural resource surveys. Some landowners are comfortable with that and some aren't. And so by having a diverse portfolio of funding, it really makes it easier for the partnership to then work together to allocate those funds and to accommodate all the different kinds of properties and landowners that you have within your project area. So I think I will end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Yep.
We have just a few minutes. Can I have some questions before we open it up to the big group? Sally, do you have any questions in the chat?
Not yet, but we'll give it a minute or so. Are we moving into the big group discussion next? Because if so, why don't we start that now? And I'm sure if there are questions, people can ask them when we're in our discussion.
Perfect. So I will stop screen sharing. And then we will open it up to our bigger group discussion. So if people could turn on their videos. So we can see everyone's faces. Alyssa, as people are getting their videos turned on, there was a question for you about the funding for, I believe there's just a question from Fergus about where is the funding coming from? I don't know if, Fergus, if you want to clarify that question or just ask it on video.
I think the previous speaker from the Klamath explained a lot. You're creating a ethereal body to govern this broad landscape and who's behind it and who funds it. I think those were really good. That was a really exciting presentation. I'd like to be able to learn more about what's going on down in the Klamath and the Fremont.
So our funding sources, I'll just rattle off a few. Joint Chiefs funding, which is a mix of Forest Service and NRCS EQIP funding. Forest Service state and private funding through the Western States WUI or the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. We've applied for the NRCS RCPP program, but so far we have not been successful with that program. And then Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, has been another huge contributor to our projects.
I believe USDA has a landscape level grant program for mixed ownerships, $10 million a year, renewable for 3 years. Are you familiar with that program?
Yes, that would be the Joint Chiefs program.
Okay, got it.
believe.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very exciting what you've accomplished and the thought that's gone into it. I hope you're going to publish something.
Yeah, we have published our process in a PNW extension paper that I can make the link available to you.
Thank you.
And Fergus, I would just say all of those same funding sources that Amy outlined, those are all sources that we're utilizing here in Northeast Oregon. And I would also just emphasize the NRCS EQIP funding, which is deployed through their conservation implementation strategy areas. And we just have also a lot of foundation funding that we kind of use to cobble together a lot of this ethereal partnership that you talked about. Yes.
It's wonderful.
Great. Well, now I'd like to kind of open it up to a bigger group discussion. If people would be willing to turn on their videos and take themselves off mute, I would just like to ask you all who have had maybe experience with All Lands work, open it up to the group. What factors have you found to be successful in making All Lands projects happen? Or if projects didn't go so well, maybe what could have changed or what were factors that you think would have made them more successful? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Hi, this is Bill Lehman with the Klamath Watershed Partnership. I sometimes work with Amy regarding the Klamath-Lake Forest Health Partnership. Primarily my project manager, Leanne, is involved with that. But one of the things that I really notice when you work with collaborative groups, you have, and you can think throughout your own history, some are successful and some are not. And what are the factors that sort of make that successful? And there's a humility in the Klamath-Lake Forest Health Partnership outlook. And I think it starts with a very sort of humble approach by the founders who have opened up monthly meetings to just about anyone who is interested in contributing to this all lands approach and this just a collaborative effort that is not focused on the benefit of one individual organization, but the resource in general. And enough, you know, I'm on this call looking at some of the water issues within the Klamath Basin and how to make those groups more collaborative. And I consistently hold the Klamath-Lake Forest Health Partnership up to you know, that's the standard that I would like to see others reach.
Awesome, thanks, Bill. Does anyone else have other kind of experiences to share with All Lands work and maybe what factors have worked well?
Yes, Emery, I'd jump on what Bill said and say, in addition to that humility, it seems like I don't have the right words for it, but the willingness of different types of agencies and organizations to work together on a common goal and kind of set aside they still have their organizational identity, they still need to meet their own mission and mandate, but what's the common goal that transcends them and kind of overcomes that identity and creates a common goal? It sounds simple, but it's really profound.
Kind of next question on that is just what sort of challenges have people maybe encountered related to all lands work that we could maybe about and highlight? Yeah, Amy.
So one of our challenges is we do a good job with outreach and education to our landowners within our landscapes, but we struggle with outreach to the broader community and just having the time for that. Like even just getting information out to the general public on the benefits of forest health treatments and prescribed fire. And, we're getting into wildfire season. So, be thinking about defensible space treatments and, what are you prepared if you need to evacuate? And we're constantly, as a partnership, in this reactive mode of, okay, we have this horrible fire season, let's try to get this information out instead of being proactive. And we're still lacking in, I think, the time. We're so focused on trying to get acres treated, which I'm really proud of, but we really lack in the capacity for broader education to the public. And we need a public affairs officer for our partnership is what we need. And we just have a hard time making that happen. So that's kind of a little bit of a continual struggle for us down here.
Mm-hmm. Lots of nodding heads. Sounds like that's a broad challenge. Does anyone else have anything to add to that sort of topic?
This is Alan Journet from Southern Oregon Climate Action Now. I'd like to ask a question. One of the issues that comes up frequently when we're engaging with folks who are engaged in working on forest management issues is recognition of the changing climate. And where I'm going with this is when we focus on restoration, what we're doing is making the assumption that future climate is going to be identical to historic climate. And yet we know that that's not going to be the case. And the whole arena of climate smart management was born out of recognition of that conundrum. I didn't hear any mention of that during the course of the discussion. And I'm not trying to be confrontational. It's just, when we focus on restoration to past conditions, we're missing the future being different.
Speak to that. I don't know, Andrew,
I guess I could ask what is the lack of stability that you're foreseeing with possible climate fluctuations that isn't being addressed? Just
well,
curious.
the concern is that the temperature is rising, and that's going to cause considerable drying out of the system. Snowpack is declining, and as we go through the next 50 years to 100 years, if globally we continue the business as usual model, this is going to create conditions that are very different from past conditions. One of the folks who's done a lot of study of this is Jerry Rayfeld, who recently, I think, retired from Idaho's experimental station. And when he was looking at the future conditions, he mapped out the climate envelopes of the future, and he reported that, and his website shows 2, 4, 6, 8, something like 12 to 15 of the species that are currently very critical, both ecologically and commercially, in our forests in Oregon, are likely to be, the climate is likely to make them no longer existent in the state, or at least substantially reduced in their distribution. And several others like Douglas pine, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, grand fir, are going to be severely compromised in large parts of their range. So if we manage our forests making the assumption that future conditions are going to be appropriate to past conditions, what we're going to be doing is trying to maintain in our forests species for which the climate is no longer appropriate. That's where I'm going with that idea.
So Alan, maybe to address that, wondering if are incorporating a range of variability into their work, and if that is the case on any of our panelists else in their work, others could jump in, or I can kind of move along to another question. But is anyone kind of incorporating future range of variability and what they're doing in terms of maybe landscape prioritization?
Yeah, I think Alan raises a fair point, and one that, in my experience, a lot of, various collaborative efforts at different scales struggle with. I spoke earlier about some of the ways in which Washington Department of Natural Resources and our scientists are integrating climate models and various data related to moisture deficit and drought stress into our prioritization processes to select projects, and then also integrating climate related factors to develop landscape prescriptions. I guess my experience is that scientists are thinking about this, and practitioners are very eager to work with scientists to integrate that information into the stand and landscape level work that we're doing. I think what we're often finding is that we're not going far enough, that the prescriptions and the implementation of the work on the ground is too modest. And the challenge is not that we don't understand what the science or silvicultural prescriptions should be to create a more resilient landscape. It's how do we create the social and political support to do that, and to do that at a meaningful scale. And so I would challenge us to think more about, maybe it gets back to a little bit of the public outreach and education work that Amy described, but how do we get the public and our partners to really appreciate and own and understand that the scale of the work that we're talking about is magnitudes more than what we've been doing. So that's really our challenge. I think it's there's a lot of variability and uncertainty with the climate models, but it's really about how do we build that long-term support and that public support for the work.
Awesome, thanks, Andrew. Alyssa, did you want to jump in before our next question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to highlight what Andrew said and kind of underscore that. I think that inherently, by having this focus on all land shared stewardship work, I think it really allows that science that oftentimes kind of sits with some partners that have more capacity to really invest in that, like the Forest Service and the Pacific Northwest Research Lab. We know a lot of the really good science that's out there, but kind of underscoring what Andrew said, how do you translate that to work that's happening on other lands, or all of the research and work that is done on tribal forested landscapes? how do you translate a lot of that understanding of the how things have changed over time into what work is looking like on private landscapes? And I think this focus on shared stewardship, all lands work, it provides more of a forum and ability to really share that knowledge and put it in terms that might be more accessible to the general public and just other partners who don't necessarily have that capacity to invest in research like that, and just lean on each other a little bit for those partners that maybe have more of that capacity and share that information.
Thanks, Alyssa. What about kind of next question? Are there different tools or resources for programs? It says my internet connection is unstable, so someone just let me know if I'm cutting out. Any kind of different resources that folks have found particularly useful for accomplishing all lands work?
I have a question. I haven't heard any mention of the larger timber companies being involved in these collaboratives.
Yeah, can anyone speak to that?
Yeah, in South Central Oregon with the Klamath-Lake Forest Health Partnership, we definitely have industry at the table. We have a couple of private industrial companies that we engage with and a couple of local contractors. And then we have some engagement with Red Rock Biofuels, which is a new plant being built in Lakeview that converts biomass to jet fuel. So we actually just recently completed a shared stewardship MOU for Lake and Klamath County, and they were all signatures on that agreement. So we do engage to some extent with private industrial and industry.
And just briefly for Washington State, we have 9 forest collaborative groups that we're working with in various capacities at the department, and all of the collaboratives have industry partners at the table. In some cases, individual mills that are located in that community, regional mills, or the American Forest Resources Council and kind of similar industry associations that represent the interests of the industry.
Yeah, and very similar in Northeast Oregon on our Northern Blues Forest Collaborative. We definitely have industry representation, and they have a big interest in looking at all land projects to make sure that they are preserving their resource. So they're definitely an important actor at the table.
That's interesting to hear, because kind of on the west side here, we kind of get the impression that larger industry players are not interested in sharing information. But I guess that could vary with the situation.
Great. Well, we have about 7 minutes, so I just want to open it up to any other lessons or key insights or any kind of final questions, I guess, if folks just want to share. We're really interested in just kind of getting other people's experience with all lands work, and anything kind of lessons learned, big challenges, or factors in success. Does anyone have anything else to add before we kind of wrap things up? And anyone can also put it in the chat box. Oh, Fergus, did you want to say something? I'm not sure we can hear you, Fergus, even though it looks like you're unmuted. Maybe do you want to try typing it in the chat box? Oh, he says too complicated, sorry. Okay, well, we will be sharing. Feel free to type that question in the chat box or email Sally, and she can get that question out to our presenters too. I just want to say thank you all for being, and we are sending out a survey as well, participants, and basically asking these similar questions. If it's better for you to see your in writing, we'd love for you all to take a look at the survey and fill it out if you have a few minutes. And basically, again, all of this feedback is going to be, we're going to look at it and incorporate as we create a final version of this all lands checklist, which we hope will be a really useful tool for practitioners to really sit back and think about thinking about how to go about an all lands project and everything that really needs considered in that. So I'm gonna, Sally is going to be sending out a follow-up email, that survey information, also just in the chat box if it's something that would be easy, that's easier to access. And again, we'll be sending out an all lands checklist to anyone who's registered on this webinar, so keep an eye out. And with that, if no one has anything else, kind of other questions, last minute thoughts, I will hand it over to Sally for kind of a final announcement.
Thanks, Emery. So this is just wrapping up here. Thank you again to our sponsors. This webinar is part of the 2020 Pacific Northwest Forest Collaboratives Workshop webinar series. There are 2 more this month. The next one is next Monday, dry forest restoration on steep terrain. And then we will end on October 30th with Good Neighbor Authority in Oregon and Washington. So if you're interested in either of those, I will send out registration along with the follow-up from today. And if you have any other questions or want any more information on either the webinar series or you have questions from today, feel free to reach out. My contact is at the bottom of the screen there. So thanks, everyone.